Welcome to Exhibitionistas, the podcast where we visit exhibitions so that you have to. And this time, I'm very happy to tell you that I, Joanna Pierre-Neves, will be hosting this episode with Emily Harding, who is back to talk about Linder and her exhibition Danger Came Smiling at the Hayward Gallery. And I'm particularly happy that she comes for this episode because she does love photography. And Linda's work somehow has something to do with it, although she cuts it, reassembles it. Basically, she works with photo montage, but in a way that is absolutely breathtaking and also a way to run towards the danger, to quote kind of a favorite book of mine by Sarah Polley. And again, I will remind you that you can contribute either through our website or through the link in the show's notes. Thank you so much to those who have been donating, who've become members of Exhibitionistas, or those who have chosen to go for maybe a more substantial donation as a one-off. Thank you so much. This means a lot to me because it is such a pleasure to be in your eardrums and on YouTube and Spotify, also in your presence as a video, but it is also a lot of work, and so to see that you value this work is really meaningful. So thank you so much to those who support Exhibitionistas, and to those who cannot do it. There's others who do, so this is for everyone. The content of Exhibitionistas will always be 100% accessible, whether you donate or you don't. So thank you, and without further ado, let's do this. Hello and welcome to Exhibitionistas, the podcast where we visit exhibitions separately and then compare notes during the recording of the episode. You'll be very happy to know that today I am co-hosting with Emily Harding. She is here, she is back, and I'm so delighted to have her here with me. We are going to talk about Linda's exhibition, Danger Came Smiling, at the Hayward Gallery. So we're going back to the Hayward, Emily.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, great stuff. And it is so exciting to be back, Joanna. Nice to see you, and so good to be with the other exhibitionistas that are listening.
Yes, we are in your eardrums or in the space around you, sonically, or maybe in video form, available on Spotify and YouTube. Let's talk about our exhibition, which is Danger Came Smiling, open until the 5th of May at the Hayward Gallery, and the artist in focus is Linder. So, did you know her at all?
The cover image for the exhibition was familiar. I didn't know how to place it, but I knew that I had seen it before. And basically it's a very sexy, slim woman who looks like she has some kind of oil on her, and she's completely naked. Instead of nipples, there's a couple of mouths pasted over her breasts, which is really unsettling to see, like teeth,
to say the least. Yeah,
where nipples should be. It's like, ouch. And then her head, it's a laundry utensil.
Yes.
But yeah, so it's a giant iron over her face. I was familiar with that, but I wasn't familiar with her. I mean, I didn't know anything about her. After I got into the exhibition, there were a lot of links being made in my mind, but I wasn't actually aware of her.
She's been a presence in the UK and probably internationally, because that image was used in the, I think, 1977 album of the Buzzcocks. It was used on that cover. So obviously that image rang a bell to a lot of people, but most of us didn't know who had made it. And so the person who actually did that collage is Linder, who now is the focus of this exhibition. So it's a solo exhibition of this woman's 50 years of work. She is actually 70. She's now 71 years old. And she has this massive body of work that you can discover in this exhibition. So I will maybe just introduce Linder, her life, which is quite eventful. I mean, she was at the right time, at the right place, and at the wrong time, in the wrong place many a times. And then after the break, you'll take us through the exhibition, if that's okay, Emily.
Sounds good.
All right. So Linda Sterling, as she named herself, was born Linda Mulvey in Liverpool in 1954. So she comes from a working class background. Her dad was a bricklayer and her mother was a hospital cleaner. And she lived happily in Liverpool until she was 10 years old. When she was 10, she moved to a little place near Wigan in basically a very rural setting and a very small countryside town where she felt very confined, and she felt kind of her world reduced quite a great deal, because she says that she loved being in Liverpool. She loved particularly looking at the women in the street and the way they adorned themselves, their fashion styles, even though it wasn't her own style. She just loved looking at people, at glamorous people, at people well dressed, and culture and all of the activity and the noise of the big city. So this was quite daunting to her.
She talked about how all of the very glamorous people were coming from Liverpool in her sort of in her worldview. So it was like London was sort of another planet, you know. I mean, the big cosmopolitan center for her was Liverpool, which is lovely.
Her work developed outside of the big capital, which is kind of interesting as well. And it kind of mixes with the punk movement. But before we go there, so there's something that's quite striking in her biography, which is that she was groomed by her step-grandfather. So there's this really terrifying situation within the family home, whereby at the very ripe age of 3, she was groomed by being shown pornography. And then she ended up, being molested by this person. So this event in her life propelled a lot of things in her. And what I found quite admirable and at the same time unsettling is that she's very able to talk about this as a traumatic event that is very much connected to her work, and at the same time talk about desire and talk about the appearance of fascination with bodies at a very young age, and her own compulsiveness and her own desire and her own form of lust in that same time. So it's quite interesting to see that she holds these two things that would have been contradictory, which is to being the victim of sexual assault and at the same time still having a nascent form of sexuality and desire, and then developing into someone who's really attracted to marginal forms of sexuality connected with issues of identity, etc. So that's really, I think, one of the core themes of the exhibition, and also of her life. She talks a lot about how gender roles were so observed and so enforced in that space and in that time. She goes to Wigan and she goes to a bookshop and finds Germaine Greer's book, The Female Eunuch,
God love her,
with an amazing John Holmes cover, so a design cover that is going to be incredibly nurturing for her own creativity, which is a female body hanging on a sort of a rod, and also with handles. So there's this curvy shape, and then there's this kind of domesticity of the image that certainly turns the female body into functional objects of the home.
I mean, you just think about that, and it's like, growing up in, a very working class neighborhood in, not a big city in the UK at that time. I mean, she's growing up in a post-war UK that is trying to, become more contemporary. So much of popular culture is being born in this time. So it's like your cultural reference from being, a very young person is so small. And then suddenly sort of there's this boom of magazines and books and Germaine Greer and all of these ideas about sexuality that have, busted down the doors. Thank God, given her background, that she was able to have some access, the access she did have to those ideas. I imagine they were life-saving in some sense. You think of her work and the stories she can tell through her work and how she can express through her work, giving her agency over these narratives of desire and objectivity as a woman, and that certainly perhaps helped her through that trauma.
Yes, the empowering aspects of having access to those images and being able to manipulate them.
Yeah.
Is huge.
Over them. Yeah.
Exactly. It's huge for her. And thank you for saying that, because it also reminds me of something that she says, which is that at the time there were only 2 channels, which is something I can relate to in Portugal in the 80s, and you as well. So it's very generational, although she's quite older than us. It still affected us. And she talks about boredom. So she talks about not being able to be entertained by TV because there was nothing. And then even when there was something, it was probably not geared towards people her age. And so she talks about drawing a lot. And she's fascinated by glamorous princesses and glamorous women. So she draws a lot of female bodies with luscious clothing and dresses in these magnificent spaces, which she interprets as also being a sort of fascination with bigger, wider, richer, cultured spaces that she didn't have access to in her working class little home. And so she starts obsessively drawing, and she also finds in, I think, a magazine, illustrations of the great Aubrey Beardsley, who was an immense artist in, weirdly, a very short time, because he died when he was 25. So in the last decade of the 19th century. And he was this very accomplished draftsperson. He would draw illustrations for books, for one of Oscar Wilde's plays. And so he was quite famous, but he was also a bit decadent, which is a term she uses at times. So he drew these intricate patterns, very pre-Art Deco, and he would draw little penises and, kind of very sexualized images or erotica. And he kind of inserted these little details into the drawings. And so apparently when he illustrated Oscar Wilde's play, he would include caricatures of Oscar Wilde, who would be really furious about it. And then the publisher apparently spent ages looking at the drawings, trying to see if there was imagery that might have been, complex to deal with once it was published. Yeah. And his drawing is line drawing in black and white, beautiful. And she talks about never really having shoplifted in her life, except for this rotring number. I forget which kind of rotring, which kind of thickness of the pen, but she stole that to draw. And she talks about how that pen in some ways kind of takes over the drawing and is super incisive. It's almost like cutting, which is going to be important later, and how that allowed her to draw like Beardsley. And that it's so interesting to me, because we're raising our kids in a time when there's access to everything. And sometimes when you don't have access to much, just a tiny little thing can open this huge gate to a whole new world that you have inside of you, but that also comes from everything that you're looking at.
Yeah.
Which is so interesting.
It is. It's like, how much choice is good and useful? Do we, how much choice do we need in our lives, and is productive? I mean, is there a certain point beyond which you have an abundance of choice that is suddenly stifling?
Having access to a lot can be as terrifying as having access to nothing, basically.
Yeah.
That's incredible in her biography. And so, of course, at a certain point, she does reconnect with the big city. So she goes and studies graphic design in Manchester Polytechnic. So that's a big time for her, because in 1976, she goes to a Sex Pistols concert. And she meets everyone. Basically, she becomes long and lifelong friends with Morrissey. She's still friends with him. And she meets the Buzzcocks, who ask her, and that's, again, such a funny and endearing story. So she meets the Buzzcocks and they ask her, oh, so what do you do? And she says, well, I'm studying graphic design. I do drawings and stuff. And they say, oh, do you want to do stuff for us? And she says, yes. And so that's how it starts.
So easy.
So easy. So simple. And so she produces in 77 that cover for Orgasm Addict, which is this very iconic image. And of course the sound is that punk sound, so she gets involved.
It's a great song. Orgasm Addict. Yeah.
Yeah. But in 78 she also has her own band called Ludus. Marina Warner in the catalogue says something really interesting, which is, so ludus in Latin means playfulness, but she also connects the words to ludicrous. She buys cameras, so as soon as she goes into Manchester Polytechnic, she starts painting and drawing, because at some point she did paint, and she also buys cameras, and that at a certain point she even had this idea of becoming the Diane Arbus of the UK. So she really was into photography and she wanted to produce her own images. She was very in tune with the counterculture. She says that she could be wearing like bondage trousers, go to one of these clubs, like for example, drag queen clubs. So Dickies, she went a lot to Dickies in Manchester and took pictures of the drag queens there. And she felt safe. She said, what is really strange is that going into the punk spaces was feeling safe for me. That's where I felt that I was at the, in the safest of spaces, because we could be whatever we wanted to be. We could do whatever we wanted to do. Whereas elsewhere, I didn't feel safe. And, famous last words, because when she already had started even taking pictures of gigs, for example, she was attacked in the street by a serial rapist who was caught by the police a few months later. God. And she was carrying her cameras. He took a stiletto blade to her throat and started like assaulting her. Oof. And she said, well, my friends are coming, people are coming, I have a meeting with them. So she really started bartering with the person. And she said, and I have really expensive cameras and I can give you my cameras. So he took the cameras and left, didn't attack her. And apparently she found out through the police that he raped a woman that very night. She was so traumatized that she did not take up photography and did not touch a camera until the late 90s. And so she turned to photo montage. And this is where, it becomes a big kind of a desert, not desert, but like a crossing of the desert for her, because she takes photo montage really seriously, as she was already doing in the 70s, and took that up as her activity. And she says, she's in her 70s. And I think another take from this exhibition, after having seen a lot of exhibitions of older women who always practiced, who always worked as artists, and who deliver this life story to you packaged with a nice little, ribbon and bow. And she says, well, but this wasn't all straightforward. Like, it took me a long time to pull myself out of these states and come to a clarity of what I was doing in terms of my own production. So the title of the exhibition is connected to her band. It's the title of an LP or a second album, Danger Came Smiling, and it comes from one of her grandmother's novels. Is a title of like a sort of, I think, a romance novel of some kind, Danger Came Smiling, or maybe a thriller of some kind. So from that time and into now, there's a sort of a life that was lived, a family life, until recently. She was artist in residence at Tate St. Ives in 2014. She got the Paul Hamlin Foundation Award in 2017, and she was included in several exhibitions, and she's shown her work very recently. So in her 60th decade, into her 70th year, she's had this or late 50s, she's kind of had this presence again in a more institutional world, let's say, of exhibitions. So recent solo exhibitions, for example, include the one at Nottingham Contemporary, Kerstnergelschaft.
Well done. Well done.
I went for it.
You took a shot. Yeah.
I did. German listeners, I apologize. I know there's a lot of you. I apologize for this mispronunciation. But this one I'm going to ace. I'm going to tell you right now.
Okay.
And this next one.
I'm ready.
Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris.
Ouf, parfait.
That's it. And Museum of Modern Art, PS1. And group exhibitions and collections, as you can see in the exhibition Tate Modern, Australian Centre for Contemporary Art, Tate Britain, Museum of Contemporary Art of Chicago. So, and you have the privilege of visiting an exhibition of someone who has had a long time producing her work because she needed to. So this is a very specific kind of experience as an exhibition, I find.
And International Women's Day, right? It's like we're recording the day after, and it was a great thing to see around that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are going into the exhibition right now after the break.
Yeah, happy to. All right, well, welcome back, everybody. We are heading into the exhibition at the Hayward Gallery. It's on until the 5th of May, so you have some time. Go over and check it out. So this is the same space, obviously, where we saw the Hege Yang exhibition, but this is sort of half of the space. The other half has another exhibition, so it's 4 rooms in total. It's a retrospective, so it's obviously looking at the full expanse of her work, and the rooms are entitled Grammar, Glamour, Seduction, and Cut. So lots of great material in all of them. But so it starts off. So this is work that she started when she was at Manchester Polytechnic in 1976. And she had, abandoned drawing, and she was going for, photo montage and really doubling down on that, as you mentioned. So she's got a bunch of images from men's interest magazines, which is like cars, DIY, pornography, and women's interest magazines, which is like fashion and homemaking and romance. And she's using all of these images to kind of gather into a single image. And she has a very distinctive kind of visual style. She's kind of starting to cultivate this very distinctive style that she has of, you know, mashing these different ideas together to create something new. And in this room, Grammar, she has a whole kind of floating wall that in the middle of the room that has images with different mouths, different lipstick mouths kind of pasted on. And all of the mouths are sort of a bit oversized and a bit different in subtle and not so subtle ways.
A bit grotesque.
Bit grotesque. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, the image is exactly the same. And the only difference is the mouths. And I loved it. The exhibition kind of peaked early for me in that I just found this fascinating. This aggregation of difference, these subtle differences that make you feel vastly different about each image. And then to see them all in aggregate stacked up next to each other is just a really fun work to regard. It's fun to stand in front of. Yeah. I mean, which is why you go to exhibitions, right? But
yes, yeah.
But yeah, I felt that really profoundly with that piece. And then it's another thing. So Sufyan Ababri had a great curtain. There's a great curtain in this one too. So it's this kind of meshy white curtain that is sort of a horseshoe around this floating wall. And just inside this meshy curtain is these hanging masks. So if you're going to a masquerade ball, you might put one of these things over your face. But they are
these heads wearing it's just heads.
That's true, yeah.
Wearing masks, which is even more haunting.
Yeah, it's like mannequin heads wearing these masks. You're right. And they're just sort of floating there, you know, disconnected from any body, disembodied. But they're extraordinarily sexy. I mean, one of them has like tassels.
I love that one. I took a picture of that one. It's
too.
The pink one, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like a hot magenta color.
Yes.
And it has, those tassels like the stripper would have over their nipples, you know, and kind of swing them around. And
that's beautiful. Eyes as nipples.
Yeah.
Love it. And nipples on the eyes.
Yeah.
And eyes on the nipples.
Yeah.
Why not?
Exactly.
It's already kind of like inspired by her photo montage works.
Exactly. But yeah, there's kind of like an overly sexy, lacy, tassely, but also a bit bondagey. You know, there's a lot of images in these 4 rooms. I thought the ones of herself were the strongest. I think she's a captivating model and someone who can express so much, you know, through her own talent in front of the camera as well as behind the camera. But I thought that was some of the strongest work in here. But yeah, I kind of, there was a resistance I had to it because I was like, I am already uncomfortable. And I did feel uncomfortable. Like a lot of this made me feel uncomfortable. But there is more charm.
Yeah.
And more sort of charm. There was more dimension to the work rather than just trying to shock me. You know, I don't know. I mean, maybe in Mike Kelly, it's like he was just like, I kind of felt like he was just trying to shock. And isn't, you know, I don't know. And I felt like I was worried I might go in feeling like that about her work. But you know, this is the great beauty of exhibitions is you go on a journey with it if you just kind of open your mind a little. And I really appreciated that about this exhibition.
It's funny because we went with the same mindset because as we've spoken about before, photography for me is quite exhausting.
Right.
with the, dear listeners, if you haven't listened to the Daido Moriyama episode, it's a big one on that. About the apprehensions, about portraiture and photography in general, and the massive presence of photography in space. And I also had an apprehension. And it's funny you should say that, how you reacted to the image of the show. So the iconic image of the Buzzcocks cover, which in the Buzzcocks cover is kind of diluted by a monochromatic color, whereas in the exhibition space and the poster of the exhibition is the original version with the oily body, which is a very 80s body. It's weird that it's a 70s image.
That's true.
Because it became the 80s imagery of fashion, and like these oiled up bodies, super muscular but sensual and curvy, with big breasts but not too big, not too small, like this idealized woman who is, sporty and at the same time works and is empowered and wears stilettos but also blazers and whatever. But it seems to preempt all of that. But I had this apprehension because I find photo montage tiresome. Saying lots of things at the same time and kind of gathering images that you already have in your mind and then kind of reorganizing them in ways that become symbolic and you have to interpret, but sometimes it's quite obvious what it's trying to say. So I had big apprehensions. And when I saw the image of the toothy smiles, nipples, I thought, okay, there's something going on there. This is a good image. This is doing something for sure.
Right.
And I was a bit more excited, I have to say. So again, exhibitions are a journey, man. Honestly.
They really are. So the rest of the room has images around the sides, and then there's a couple of kind of tabletop exhibitions that have, I think, some of her magazines and notes and...
Listen, let me talk about those later. Describe the room, because those are, wow, incredible. But go ahead.
Let's start there. So we have these tabletop images. Go ahead. What?
You have those tables behind with covers and the artwork she did for Ludus, for her band.
Right, yeah.
And those drawings are those famous drawings that, well, not those ones that she talks about in her childhood, but where Aubrey Beardsley comes back. And the marriage between Beardsley's line black and white drawings and the punk geometric, because her eyebrows are triangles, right? She has the 80s eyebrows painted on her face almost. And so they find themselves in those covers with these beautiful drawings that are so incredible. I mean, and the drawings are just beautiful to gaze at because they're so contemporary to those times. And at the same time, they go and seek out Aubrey Beardsley and say, this is probably what you would have been doing. Because he was a dandy and he had this very mysterious sexuality. So he was accused because, after the play, he did the illustrations for Oscar Wilde's play. Oscar Wilde was imprisoned, as we know, and was accused of being, I don't know what the term was at the time, but of being homosexual, basically. And so there were suspicions about Beardsley's sexuality. It is kind of thought now that he was either asexual or had an incestuous relationship with his sister, which I find weird because in the exhibition at the Tate Britain a few years back in 21, I think, or 22, there were some pictures of Mabel, his sister. He was dressed as a man and seemed to gear more towards the lesbian aspect of sexuality, but we don't know because in those times those things couldn't be written about. And Beardsley actually asked a friend to destroy his more sexual, obscene, as he said, drawings after he died, which luckily wasn't done. So there's also kind of this idea of what would have Beardsley have done, and where are the issues in our society now? What is accepted and what isn't? That marriage between Beardsley and the punk movement is kind of something. And the music is quite good. Lotus, it's quite nice.
So that first room has a lot of images of, kind of her early photo montage. The one whole section is called Pretty Girls, and it's from 1977. And it is a series of naked women with various kind of appliances and household items for their heads. So kind of they're all in a domestic scene. I think it's the same woman, actually.
It's the same woman on several pieces of furniture.
Yeah.
Basically, completely naked in sexy posing, like in pin-up poses.
Yeah. And they have like maybe a coffee pot for a head, or other items masking how they look. You can see the birth of her ideas here, and kind of much more developed perhaps later on.
So she works very early on, and she collects very early on pornographic magazines of certain periods. So she goes back to the 40s, to the 50s, to the 60s, and this becomes systematic across time up until now. And she has an incredible quote that connects the assault she suffered as a child and this use of pornographic images in an interview for The Guardian. She talks about how she had to undergo a form of therapy that was supposed to heal, which is based on eye movement, that was supposed to heal something that was happening to her so very recently, so late in life, which was these recurring images that were coming back to her, these visions that were very, very vivid. So she says, quote, "A whole new swathe of imagery came up and it was very, very vivid," unquote. And so she describes these images that obviously are related to her assault. And she says, quote, "I was somehow recalling the ballet books I used to have aged 3. I think that kind of grooming begins with the handling of the child's body in a certain way in domestic spaces. In my montages, I reverse engineer what a pedophile spends their time engineering," unquote.
Wow.
And that is incredible. I mean, that's just, there's so many layers to this. So the ballet, so she was fascinated by ballet images, which is what I meant when I said that she was already looking at these images of bodies to be watched, doing elegant, beautiful, creating beauty, and noting that men and women were wearing makeup. So there's a form of drag in ballet that she was really drawn to. And she found that that was the place to be. That's where she wanted to be. But those images was also the ones that she associated. So that pleasure she had, which at that point was visual pleasure, obviously aesthetic pleasure, were connecting to the images that she was being shown by a member of her family that were explicit images and sexual images. And so she kind of like associated both. And in this room, you can have a very surface reading of these images, which is echoed by the texts, which I find really problematic because they solve the images for you. I love that there's text in exhibitions. I really respect that job. I write as well for exhibitions, but I am really worried that the subtleties of her work kind of go out of the window with those texts that resolve quite quickly what she's doing and kind of connecting the imagery to women's rights and to the role of women in domestic interiors, when there's also a layer of pure admiration for women's body and an intentional relationship and pleasure with sex, and sex that is given to you in the voyeuristic sense, on the printed image that also comes in Playboy. She collects a lot of Playboy magazines with Truman Capote texts and with artists who sometimes illustrated those magazines. So there's a real connection, and there's a taboo. She says in an interview, no one talks about... No, she doesn't say that. There's a book about porn which starts with, no one talks about their consumption of porn. It's the 20% of the images and the searches on the internet. It's a lot.
God. Wow.
And no one talks about it.
Yeah.
So that's a really important point, because as you say, these are, the first images that she's working with. There's actually one which has a woman on a kitchen counter inside a pan, emerging from the pan. She looks a bit like one of those prehistoric Venus little amulet sculptures. And then there's a mixer on her head, and then there's eyes and a mouth on the mixer. And it looks a lot like the Germaine Greer cover of the magazine. And there's a sausage jar on the foreground, and you don't know exactly what was added and what wasn't, and the degree of absurdity of the images, the source of images, kind of pops out as well. So my fear of the photo montage images being a bit overwhelming was diffused in this room, because she is surgical.
Yeah.
She is precise.
Yep.
And she's very minimal in what she adds onto the images.
Yeah, you really feel the start of something, because it's like later on there's some photo montages that she does that are just so so layered. Like, she's using so much more. The feel for line and composition, you can feel it, just all of her years of life and experience kind of coming together there. So that is grammar, and then we go to glamour. And she was, sort of interested in these glamorous women from Liverpool and from, kind of the urban centers around where she grew up. And she has a section in this next room that is dedicated to what she calls working class drag clubs near where she was. And it's just really lovely, intimate pictures of these people kind of putting on their glamour and putting on literally the clothing of it, but putting on the internal kind of machinations of it as well. And she has the she images, which is the self-portraits. These are bigger portraits, self-portraits, and she's dressed in kind of like a old castaway dress with a bit of lace at the top. She has strings and strings of pearls around her
mum's
neck.
pearls.
Yeah.
She borrowed her mum's pearls. Yeah.
And you can't help but notice, like, some of them are quite choker, I mean, they're very close to the neck. And then she has her face partially covered in bandages or saran wrap, or really clever ones where she has cut out the lower half of a woman's face from a magazine, it looks like, and matched it up to her own face almost perfectly. And then there's, some kind of quotes in there as well. Some, I am your death, behind my flesh does my skull smile. Kind of like...
Those are the lyrics of Lotus.
Oh, right. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
I missed that.
That's why the text is so weird, because you look and you think, this looks like a conceptual piece. And then you read the text and you think, this doesn't sound like texts of conceptual pieces. And because they are texts that she used to shout as a band member. Yeah. And then you have a video of her as well in the middle of that room.
Oh, right. Yeah. Do you want to talk about the video?
Yeah, so the video shows two aspects of her practice in those days, which were bodybuilding. That's why I'm saying, like, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of interviews out there of her. So I knew quite a bunch of things about her, and I thought, oh, I know everything, But then you see an image of her bodybuilding. So she at some point got interested in the idea of the transformation of the body. And so she is filmed lifting these weights with these shorts and this very serious stance. And I think she's wearing quite a bit of makeup. So it's quite an ambivalent, ambiguous image. And then you have another image, which is her in concert wearing pieces of meat.
Oh, yeah.
That she would then take out and reveal a huge dildo emerging from her body. And so that's when she was performing with Lettuce, with her band. So there's all these aspects to her where she's exploring, and that's when you start seeing that the narrative that you might have had because you've listened to an interview before of what happened to her, you know, the way she was groomed, is nuanced because she's also talking about her own desire and her own interest in, this is not my expression, but deviant, you know, forms of sexuality or marginalized identities who are associated with different forms of sexuality. And she doesn't put it out there as it being her sexuality, which I find really interesting. There's a fluidness of the drag queens in the corner. It's just a bunch of photos. And it got me thinking, like, I'm glad that's... it's a horrible thing to say because what prompted that was a horrible assault. But I'm glad that she reverted to a more creative practice rather than photography, because those are great images, but I think she has so much to give in terms of her own practice and her own photo collage and photo montage. And there's really this masterful presentation of what it means to be a woman who wants to be more than just what the press or a society or a certain class as well, the working class, you know, she comes from a specific point of view, wants women to be. So I think there's much more to her than just this sort of surface level critique of the role of women in society. There's much more to her than that.
I couldn't help myself, and this is a terrible thing, but the last time I was in that space was for Hagee Yang. And she just went all over the place. Like, Hagee Yang had so many different types of expression, right? I mean, she had, you know, in some of those rooms, she had installations of her moving artworks around the world. So she had a palette with literally, you know, all of her things packaged up. In another room, she had some sculptures that she'd done. She, you know, had the paper...
mesmerizing mesh, you know,
exactly. I mean, she was just
shamanic folding
the blinds,
paper inspired,
the blinds everywhere. I mean, you know, she did so many different types of things, and there was part of me as I was going through this exhibition that was saying that, you know, I was sort of thinking, you know, she's really done this one thing, you know, the photo montage. I mean, she's obviously done a bit of photography, and, you know, music, drawing, some other bits certainly around the side, but like her through line is definitely this photo montage, and you can see her deepening within that. And there was part of me that was like a bit disappointed that because this was a retrospective, I wanted to see more of those tangents and kind of where she pushed out into other areas. And so I was doing some comparison, which is never, I think, that useful. But
because she's done other things.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, but I agree. The main line of work is the photo montage, for sure.
But it did. I also was trying to catch myself there, because within the photo montage, you can see so much development. You know, you can see her ideas forming and developing, and her eye for line and design and composition. And, you know, as she talked about The fact that you can have, different time. You can go across time. You can get a magazine from the 60s and a magazine from the 90s and a magazine from now, and combine all of those elements together in a way that is just completely unique and special for photo montage. Should we move to the next room?
Sure.
Seduction. Yeah. So there's a quote there at the start of the room that says, "To be trained in glamour was often also to be trained in the art of seduction." So she's big on the etymology of words, and the word seduction originally meant to lead astray. So this room contains a lot of floral imagery as well. So kind of rather than having the domestic items, covering certain portions of people's bodies, or having the men's or women's interest magazines represented, it's more about having, a rose covering strategic spots of men or women's bodies. And the way that she's doing this, and I don't even know how to describe it. I mean, it's very sexy images, right? Like there's some of sort of orgies almost, where there's several people naked together, giving each other some pleasure.
There's one that's so striking.
Which one?
Because there's 3 women together, and she placed the flower in a way that just deconstructs the sexual dynamic, and suddenly you're looking at these women and thinking, what were they looking at? How were they doing this? What led them there? And she says about flowers are basically, so quotes, flowers are basically nature's pornography.
Yeah.
It's like, come over here and be attracted to me, unquote. Mm-hmm. So they're still super sensual, but it's like she's deviating sensuality to something much more open, visceral, and just the sheer pleasure of the body opening up to you and calling you and seducing you. And at the same time, and she talks a lot about this, she spends a lot of time with these images, to the point where she says that she feels smells. So for her, Playboys from the 60s have smells of pipe smoke.
Bacon, she mentioned.
Bacon.
Yeah.
So she has synesthesia. She kind of has these, or trauma is bringing a lot of stuff. She's very vague about that. And she says that she goes into a sort of trance, and she looks at these women and she feels like she's releasing them. So maybe now is the time to say that she uses a scalpel to cut the images. So these images are quite fantastic also in the way they're associated together, because it looks like Photoshop, and it preempts Photoshop, because they're cut with huge precision. She uses a scalpel, and so the scalpel, she compares it to the Rotring, so that line pen that she used to use, and there's an incredible continuity, and she feels like she's still drawing, but she's taking these images, she's cutting them, she's spending a lot of time, and she thinks about these women, and she uses glue. So she says, it's funny because no one asks me about the glue. And for me, it's the most important thing, because that's the mess. It's messy. It's horrendous. You've drawn your tableau, you've put everything together, and then is the moment where you have to just take your finger, humidify it with your tongue. I don't know how she does it. Lift the thing and then put some glue on it. And she says that she uses like 99p glue from the high street. And that glue is, quote, like the ghost that haunts every photo montage. And I associate glue to semen. I'm sorry, dear listeners, but for me, when I was listening to her, I was like, And maybe female, excretions, let's say. It feels like the pleasure. It feels like the mess of the pleasure, the end of it. And there's something also, and the excitement. And there's something about cutting. So she talks about forensic nature of the images and the surgery that she operates, because a scalpel, and she says, like, I was attacked by a stiletto blade. I had a stiletto blade held to my throat. So the blade attacks you and can kill you or can harm you. But if you're doing surgery, then it can heal you. So there's the potential of cutting to heal. I'll leave it there. It's a complex subject, but there's something to it for sure.
In the middle of the room, there's this giant sculpture. The one that has, it's essentially like a cut rug, I guess. And it's a colorful rug, and it sort of spirals upward. And so it's connected to something hanging from the ceiling. So it's, it's pretty large. And then there's eyes that are sewn into it.
So it's tufting. It's called tufting. It's it's a sort of gun that goes into the fabric or the canvas and pierces it and kind of leaves the yarn. So someone else did that for her. She made the pattern, and so it's kind of like those eyes that she collages, that she applies to other elements. So there's an element of the reoccurring eye with Daido Moriyama as well. Actually, there's a relation there as well. Is in that thing that is kind of like an orange peel hanging from the ceiling. It's very thin.
Exactly, yeah.
And it kind of spirals at the center of the space. That's
a really good description of it, an orange peel. And it's called Diagrams of Love, Marriage of Eyes. She did that in 2016. Then, sort of against one wall, is some images that are enormous. So it's 3 huge images, and the center image is the biggest, like it's sort of floor to ceiling almost. And it's women, it's people covered in like colorful goo, and it's called splotching. Splushing, that's it, splushing. And it comes from sort of this eroticism of being covered in food scraps and
mushy food. It's a sexual fetish called splushing.
Yeah.
And you cover yourself with viscous liquids and viscous mushy food, or basically, and it's a fetish. I mean, it's a niche fetish like tickling or whatever, but it does exist.
It might be more niche than tickling, I imagine. But it's so there's the 2 images on the side are of women covered in this, and then in the middle there's a couple of people covered in it. And I thought it was interesting that they're clothed. So they're under so much of this goo and this colorful goo that it's just streaming down their faces and their bodies. But they actually have clothes on underneath, which I noticed that too. I found that very odd.
Yeah, I thought they would be naked.
Me too.
It's her and a friend. It's 2 women, and they did that after she was feeding her father, who had a stroke. Yeah. And he could only eat that kind of food, jello and custard and that kind of thing. And she did these photos by using that kind of food on herself and her friend, and associating it with a sexual fetish. And I thought that's peculiar, because I thought it would be a freeing thing to just get naked. So it's kind of that thing where you can't prevent yourself from thinking, is this a sexual fetish for her, or is it just the imagery and the aesthetic that she's using for her art? That and it doesn't matter. I don't need an answer. I'm not curious. It's just a question that pops up in kind of this thing of, where does a lifestyle stop and the art commences, and do they overlap? Are they the same? And I think that's an interesting question, because there's this idea that certain people live as art, drag queens and drag kings and so many people who are entertainers, and their lifestyle and their clothing and what they are and what they do becomes to a certain extent a performance. You know, there's a performative aspect to it. And she did do performance, and I think at a certain point it kind of overlaps, but I think the plasticity and the visual creativity at the end of the day is the most important thing for her. And on the other side, there's a lot of photo montages from Playboy magazines of the 60s, I think. And there's one which is called A Daughter's Gift. And it's a woman, again, with the flat posing, like pin-up poses, revealing her breasts, probably revealing her genitalia, but the genitalia is covered with white roses. And there's a painting in the back that was added because it's a bit wonky. It was added to the image. And there's kind of a yellow margin on 3 sides and cut on the left side. And she's wearing these boots, which at a certain point from the 60s onward were kind of a symbol of liberation and empowerment, and also in S&M, the dominatrix wears boots often. So it's a symbol of empowerment, and it's called A Daughter's Gift, and it's associated with that time where she was taking care of her dad. Apparently she was grieving her mom, so it was a very difficult period for her. She was grieving, she was caring for a parent. And then her language is almost incestuous, and the relationship with Beardsley comes again in this idea of the incest and the desire coming from within a domestic space that is not safe from transgression. And that room is unsettling, was very unsettling to me. Not a fetish, couldn't care less. I mean, obviously I could never ever get close to that horrendous texture. Sploshing is not for me, let's just say that. But I found the images really interesting and pleasing. They're very colorful. There's a lot of yellow in there. But then there's this incestuous presence. And the orange peel made me think of a story told by Louise Bourgeois. There's a video of Louise Bourgeois peeling an orange and saying that her dad was very inappropriate, and he would peel oranges, and as she goes she peels the orange, I hope I'm remembering this right, and he would peel the orange revealing a sort of phallic shape, because she's clearly sharing something that was horrendous to her, Louise Bourgeois. And so Linder's work, for all the apprehension I had, really conquered me. Like, I was in it, loved it, but I was so tired, because it is all about finding your way as a woman who seeks pleasure and who likes other women's bodies and likes your own body and feels empowered by boobiness, genitalianess, secretions, body liquids, and at the same time the only place you find is in this loop between seduction, danger, glamour, the glamour of it all, and sex. And that kind of never-ending loop where you feel caught as a woman all the time. And it's something that I cannot disentangle, and that I find really tiring at this point, nearing my 50th decade in the world. There's a whole history of Pierre Molinier, who took pictures of women with their skirts up, so you could see their naked bodies from waist down, and then you couldn't see their faces or their torsos. There's Hans Belmer with, she had this breastplate that she used when she was she boxing at some point? Listen, she had this huge amount of activities that then she uses in some photo collages where she puts herself, image of her younger self. So they're from the 10s or the 20s in the 21st century, so quite recent images. There's so much in that loop that she explores constantly. And I don't know, how about you? How did you feel at this point in the exhibition?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like, and this is complete conjecture, right? Like, I have no idea, but there was, knowing a little bit about her past, I thought, is what a great thing for her to be able to have some agency over these narratives and to be able to direct. She's creating them, right? And she's putting them out there, about women's role in the world and their relationship to sex, etc. She's creating her own story there, and I think that's hopefully that's a very liberating channel for her to express. And so maybe her private life is freer because of it, is less encumbered with, I have no idea, of course, it's like, but I know that it can work that way for when people find those outlets and those channels, especially as she has done at such a high level. But yeah, it was a lot more to take in than I thought, I sort of, I remember when I first moved to New York in 1998, going to this artist opening, and it was a young person doing photo montage, and not very well. Like it was a first stab at it kind of thing. And I remember thinking, oh gosh, this has really been done a lot. This is the late 90s by that point, And so when I was, getting ready to go see her, I had sort of thought like, oh, this is all going to be things that I will have seen before. But I think there is something about letting the depth that you're talking about really sink in. And that is very heavy. Like it is really heavy. And it is very sobering about how much has changed and kind of not as much, and how much is going backwards. There's so much more to it than meets the eye. And it's nice to go through an exhibition and just feel surprised and have that journey of resistance, and then kind of intrigue and awe and wonder, and, kind of be left in a place that makes you want to know more. So yeah, it's great.
Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you for visiting this exhibition with
Happy
me.
to.
And until next time, thank you so much for listening, guys. And have a good one until the next episode.
All right. See you soon.